Hey everybody, how you doing? Paul McIntosh here at Stoicism for today. Today I'm gonna talk about gardening our minds, because it's one of my favorite topics actually, and one that, as a metaphor, really resonates with me, just because I do spend a fair amount of time in the garden. But it's one of my not only does it provide me with food, but it also provides me with a lot of time to think and contemplate and meditate. And it's also one of my ways to, I don't know, can you say get back to nature? Be part of nature, the whole growing process. And part of Stoicism is about nature. Nature is a thing that we can't really escape, no matter where we live. Whether you live in the city or you live in the country, you live in town, just outside of town, whatever the case, it's something which is always there. So let's start off with, and part of this I learned from Farmer Mario, and watching his life and renting a farm off of him. Uh, I was living on 200 acres that he farmed. It was corn or soybeans or wheat or whatever, it depended on the year. But Mario was a pretty interesting cat. He monster of a man. Like, this guy was a, a barrel Italian guy, and he was probably in his 50s when I met him and first rented the farm off him, and I rented it a couple of times over the years. But his story is interesting because he had a sixth grade education for the most part. He left school at the sixth grade. His family came over from Italy. They were born there and came here as young kids. Went to school, but by the time he got to the sixth grade, mom and dad needed him to work on the farm. So him and his brother was older. They left school and worked on the family farm. They came over here and bought a few acres and worked that and sold vegetables and just built themselves up. And over the course of the years, they managed to acquire, in this one little town where I lived and he lived, over 6,000 acres over the course of, I'm going to say, probably 40 years. And all the trappings that went with it, just from farming, and a little piece here and a little piece there. And talking with him was always very interesting, because talking about his life and his early days and the early farming days, they started off with picking out land that they knew that they could cultivate and get something out of. Was the land viable, I guess, is the first part that they looked at. And that's what they did. They found a piece of land, and they tilled it, and they planted seeds and grew food, not only for the family, but to make money so that they could buy more land and to expand on their gardens, which became fields eventually. So, looking at it from that standpoint, and looking the comparison between our mind and gardening, our minds are pretty fertile, and they're full of thoughts, hopes, dreams, a whole cavalcade of things, but mostly it's thoughts. So when you look at your mind as a garden, along the way, if we don't tend to it properly, we get a lot of weeds there. We get a lot of unwanted thoughts. We get a lot of things that don't help us as humans to grow, to prosper, to flower, to fruit. So looking at our minds and the thoughts that we have is a really important part of Stoicism, and using the principles, the four basic ones. Uh, it's a really good guide for how to think so that you can plant those thoughts in your mind that are going to help you, not the ones that are going to hinder you. And it's a constant, yes, you can plant all these good thoughts, but if you're not careful and you don't pay attention, there's going to be weeds there that you're going to have to deal with. And you're going to have to pull those weeds out and get rid of them, get rid of those thoughts that aren't helping you. Now, yes, we call them weeds, but yes, they could also be herbs. But the fact is, we're looking at producing something. And if that something is corn, then everything else that grows in there is not helping us produce corn. So if we have a thought that we want to be better, that we want to achieve something, and fill in the blank there with whatever you want. If in our mind we have a lot of other thoughts that are deflecting the fact that we want to have this certain thing, it's not going to help us. So how do we do that? Well, mindfulness comes to mind really quickly. Um, but it's a paying attention and making sure that you spend time with yourself and your thoughts, making sure that garden's clean, so that those other thoughts can prosper. And you want to feed those thoughts, but what you want to feed them with, I guess, is what you want to feed those thoughts with is the things that help produce them. You know, what does corn need to be good corn, to be corn that is good for you to eat and good for you to use? Well, it needs water, it needs sunshine, it needs nourishment. So you get the nourishment from the soil, from the mind. You can nourish that thought, that corn. You know, you can give it sunshine, and your sunshine is emotions and feelings. Um, you know, you you need money for something, or you're looking at your debts and everything else. And when you're looking at all of that, how do you feel? You know, that's a pretty heavy weight. That's a pretty bad feeling. But on the other hand, if you look at what you're doing, whether it's your business or whether it's your job or whatever the case, maybe it's your education. Look at that with happy thoughts, with good, positive thoughts. Feed it with sunshine emotion. You know, just to nourish it, and you'll find that when you start feeding that corn, that thought, with those good, happy emotions, something happens in your mind, and your mind reaches out and brings into you things to help you along the way, whether it's people, whether it's things, doesn't really matter. But certain things will happen outside of you that you're drawing to help you produce that corn, to help you make that thought an actual physical thing. So it's important to watch the weeds. It's important to use all the tools that you have at your disposal, and you've got so many of them, whether you realize it or not, to be able to pull this thing off that you're trying to do. Keeping those weeds at bay is going to help you lead a better life. And after all, that's really what we're looking for, isn't it? It's a better life. Okay, so do some mind gardening. Make sure you've got some sunshine. Make sure you've got some water. And start off with good soil. Start off with a clear mind. How do you get a clear mind? You meditate, you contemplate, but you don't focus. You don't focus on the crap. Focusing on the crap just brings more of it. Whatever you're going to focus on is what you're going to create. So when you're doing that gardening, focus on your corn. Pay attention to the corn. Pay attention to the idea. Pay attention to the thing that you want to create. And that'll help out. We'll do more on mind gardening. We'll do more on mind gardening soon, because it really is one of my favorite topics, because it's just such a great metaphor. Okay, that's it for today. As usual, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you get notifications. I'll drop one of these every week at least, and probably a couple more tidbits along the way. Hope you're enjoying them so far. We'll talk to you soon.